Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Brendan Hauser with EVOQ Bike. Got an awesome podcast today with Dr. Amanda Smith, where we really have the focus on the female endurance athlete. We want to talk about how does birth control affect exercise and your performance? What about the injuries and ailments that affect females more than males, and how you can keep an eye out for these types of things? And hormones and women's exercise physiology. And then, really, how does this all affect your training and racing? And some of her own anecdotes from preparing for the Ironman that she has in 2 weeks. And obviously, Stacy Sims comes up a bunch from her book Roar, and we've talked about her way back, probably on the podcast in 2018 or 19, after I was at the Training Peaks University, and she did a great talk out there. So check out the show notes below for more links, how to contact Amanda, how to follow along with what she's posting online. Amanda, thanks so much for doing this. Everybody, good luck with your training and racing, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya. Awesome. Thanks for connecting. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Yeah. How's everything going this morning?
Pretty well. Like I have an off day. I'm doing an Ironman in 13 days.
Oh,
So
whoa.
yeah, I'm like really excited. I have like really good fitness right now. So, but have you ever done an Ironman?
Hell no.
It's
I've done a sprint try like accidentally, and will never probably, I won't say never. I most likely will not do that again.
I like at this point advise everyone to try it. Because I've been doing endurance sports for like 20 years, but like an Ironman's just such a fucking animal. Like just eating and like knowing how to pace, not to go too hard. Like it's been really fun.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I think the thing is for me, I actually like running, but I always get injured.
Mhm.
So then it ruins the biking, and yeah, I don't know. So probably not. But
I hear you.
anywho, I appreciate you reaching out. I'm excited to do this podcast and jump into some topics that I would definitely never do a podcast on for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So let's first start with an intro. Amanda Smith, who are you?
I'm Dr. Amanda Smith. I'm a chiropractic sports physician and NBC board certified physiotherapist. I'm a ACSM board eligible exercise physiologist, and I treat injured athletes and coach nutrition and endurance sports in Atlanta. And I'm a
Cool.
bike fitter.
Was that last part?
And I'm a bike fitter at Specialized Atlanta.
Okay, heck yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a great reach out when you were like, "Hey, I see a lot of dudes on your podcast. What's up?" And I was like, "Let's go." Okay. And then Amanda hit me with some really good topics that, I think I maybe had done a mini podcast a long time ago after a Training Peak seminar when I saw Stacy Sims speak, and just said, "Hey, these are some tips that she passed along." And I'd be curious too, like, are these still, this was maybe back in 2018, 17. So you kind of brought up some of them in the bullet points that we're going to talk about: overview of hormones, how this affects the normal menstrual cycle for female athletes, injuries and ailments that affect females more than males. This I'm really curious to hear about how birth control affects exercise. And then also, I think one of the last bullet points that we didn't talk about: how does all this affect and we can go to Ironman training. If you're open to sharing like things that you've seen or tips and tricks that just come straight from you, would be awesome. What's the best place to start? Like, what's the usual question, or what do you think is the most not unknown topic that we, of all those bullet points, but maybe the most, like, women have the most questions on?
I think maybe the importance of it, of the topic itself, and then even when you kind of were like, well, like I don't know, maybe like is that going to go well for your audience? And I was like, dude, that's the perfect question because like that's the importance of it. We're talking about 50% of the population here, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they do and should train a little bit differently than dudes. Like there's just a lot, like a few things to keep in mind when training women. And I think it might be like a little taboo as like a male coach with a female athlete, but like it shouldn't be. And that's kind of the thing I'm trying to like emphasize here. And then the emphasis too is it's still, as someone that does a lot of blood work for my athletes, it's something that like shouldn't be taboo in understanding that blood work and then understanding what affects women more than men. And then even just testing in general. So like the pharmaceutical industry has this nasty habit of not including women in their testing, which is like absolutely terrible. Their clinical trials, like one of the popular ones to talk about is like Ambien, and there was like no women in those clinical trials. And I think for me right now, the only the only patients I have that are taking Ambien are women, and that's freaking
Mm.
wild, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you bring up a good point. After I went to that conference, I said to, I think at that point I had coached maybe 5 or 6 females, and I think I hit up a couple former athletes and just said, "Hey, this is what I learned. If anyone's open to talking about this, happy to. If not," and really, the info that I thought was very interesting from Stacy was talking about when to take the pill
Mhm.
and working with the menstrual cycle of starting to track. That she said back then, maybe this isn't true anymore. I'd be curious, like you PR when you're ovulating, and did that match up to the female athlete's experience? And that's one thing that we can talk about, like that I had asked you. Everyone didn't have the same perception of when they were PRing and the watts. So like we'll unpack that a little bit because I think it's probably you had some really good points of why some athletes might not see that. So yeah, let's hit that big bullet point that you were talking about. Like what is the importance of this topic aside from, maybe females don't even, newer athletes especially might not understand that they're taking in a lot of information that is based on things that men have done. Are there other big picture aspects of this that, you want to have female athletes be aware of?
Yeah, yeah. So like I have PowerPoints in front of me, so I want to like rattle off very specific stats with sources. So
Okay.
like refer back to this podcast. But the number one thing is like, right, this is 2024, and this was the first year the Olympics has been 50-50 representation, male and female. Right, a lot of factors that contribute to that. There was like huge stigmas, even up until 2010, that restricted females from competing in sport. And people think I'm like crazy. They're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, women's ski jumping in 2010 didn't happen because the guy that was in charge of ski jumping said that a woman's uterus would fall out if they did, right? Like I can hear, like it's crazy, but that
Are you
stuff happened.
serious?
I'm serious, man. Let me
Uh,
find it.
God,
And
I don't even want to Google that because that's just so pathetic.
Gianfranco Casper, the Secretary General of the International Ski Federation, during a 2005 NPR interview, was quoted as saying the female uterus might burst during landing, and ski jumping is not appropriate from ladies from a medical standpoint. Which there's absolutely no merit in that statement. But like I said about like drug testing, that still happens, and exercise physiology testing is even worse. So, in a 2021 meta analysis of 5,261 studies, including 12.5 million participants, we only had women only accounted for 34% of those studies, and only 6% of those studies were exclusively focused on women. Right?
Mm,
So, like, they're different, right? Women have more stress
mhm,
fractures, they have more anemias, iron anemia, they have more autoimmune disorders. They have higher percentage of ACL tears, higher percentage of post-concussive syndrome, depending on when you get the concussion during your menstrual cycle. DVTs, POTS, PCOS, endometriosis, obviously those things, but then like frozen shoulder, and then even atypical heart attacks. That's the one that kind of gets me that like, yo, it's not atypical. That's just how women have heart attacks. Like, we need to
mm.
get that straight and stop,
Well,
you know?
that's well said. Yeah. Do you know off the top of your head what's some of the reasoning of like the concussion aspect? Why post concussion? Is it hormonally
Yep.
related? Okay.
Yeah, so progesterone is neuroprotective. So if you get, and which I actually had a concussion last year in my luteal phase, so it was like the immediate concussion symptoms like weren't really. I don't want to say they weren't there because they were there, and I kind of denied them. As
Mm,
high level cyclists and athletes do, they're like, I'm fine. But then it just like lingers because as progression or as progesterone goes away in the luteal phase, and then the follicular phase comes around, which should be the phase of healing and when you can go hard. I like just didn't have it, and I was getting like these headaches, and I had like a dysautonomia where my heart rate was going crazy, and then I was like, oh shit, like I got hit pretty hard, like, so you got to take a step back and just like have that knowledge and not push through that stuff because obviously it's just going to make it worse if you don't like
mm.
acknowledge like I have dysautonomia. I need to control my heart rate. I need to rest. I don't need to go hard on these intervals, you know?
So two things.
Hmm.
For this podcast is for females, but also for males that either coach or maybe you train with a female. So let's get some basics down because I'm not going to pretend like I know all this. Follicular, luteal.
Yeah.
Put those into easier terms for us of like where in the phase is that?
Absolutely. So the follicular phase is day 0 to day 14. And like there's different podcasts, there's different research that will break these phases down into like 4 and 6 weeks and like not 6 weeks but 4 and 6 phases. And I think people are overcomplicating it. But if we
Mm,
just do 2 phases, just make it easy.
okay.
So day 0 to day 14 is the follicular phase.
Okay.
On day 0 is when women get their period. They start that actual bleed. They're shedding the lining of their uterus.
Hmm.
And on day 14, and this varies, but we're going to make it easy and say day 14 is when luteinizing hormone spikes. You ovulate. You can drop an egg. Or you have that egg. You can become pregnant in the when that luteal phase happens. And now that's only a 24-hour period, really, that you can get pregnant. So I think that's also a misnomer with like a lot of women included, that they're like, oh, well, there's this range, and there's a range that you might be able to get pregnant because you don't know when that luteinizing hormone spikes, and then sperm survives inside a female for up to like 3 days, but it's like really only 24 hours that you need to really worry about. But then it does happen after that. But the kicker is we're not exactly sure when luteinizing hormone spikes. So there's luteinizing hormone strips that are like 49 cents that you can actually test to know. And then after that is when the luteal phase starts. And that's typically the phase or that is the phase of higher hormones. And that's when progesterone spikes. Progesterone's the star of the show in the luteal phase. And then estrogen's more the star of the show as that's spiking into the day 14. So we like estrogen as athletes. Estrogen's anabolic. It's good for. There's more good things about estrogen for sure than progesterone. So that's why we have more benefits in the follicular phase than the luteal phase.
So when do women take the pill? How long does that have to work? Like I'm assuming it wants to like be there to avoid pregnancy around this 14-day mark. Do you take it a little bit before that, or is that like a? I mean, I know there's different products, but just
There's a
yeah.
bunch of different birth control pills, and I would actually like I that's almost a whole topic in itself because
Okay.
there's different types, and there's
Mm.
oral contraceptives in themselves have different effects. And then but a lot of women will take a pill every single day, and then obviously the way there's weeks that are they're like sugar pills that just get you in the habit of taking it, and then some women have bleeds during it. Some they kind of get their period but they kind of don't. But overall, birth control mostly puts you in that luteal phase.
Mm.
So I'll send you some graphics if you want to include them. But you look at like these huge fluctuations, and that's what's cool about women's hormones is that you want to take advantage of the follicular phase when estrogen's spiking because it's almost like this bump in performance that you're given, and your HRV is going to be better then. You're going to be able to recover from workouts better. You can slack on your nutrition a little bit more then. But it seems like in the luteal phase, everything has to be perfect, or you can't hit those same numbers as you can in the follicular phase, if you will. But birth control almost levels that all out and puts you in the luteal phase the entire time.
Which would be worse for training.
Yeah,
Okay.
the studies on birth control and training, they're not a huge, some of them aren't a huge difference, but it's enough for me that I'm like, well, why would I do that if I can get a gain to have a true follicular phase? Why would I take birth control for that purpose? There's other ways around the goal of birth control, if you will.
What's is there a trend amongst, let's say, Cat 1, 2 pro women? Do they tend to go on birth control or stay off for that reason of having the follicular phase?
I
Or is
know
everybody all over?
I think I know more women that are not taking birth control. I know some that are.
Hmm.
And I mean that politely. I don't want to, get into anyone's beliefs. But I'm pretty
Totally.
firm on not taking birth control. Like I think there's like if you don't want to get pregnant, there's tons of ways around that. That I don't have to take the pill and those benefits. So like, um, Yeah, I'm trying to think of how deep to go into that. How
No,
easy.
that's no. I think
Yeah,
it's helpful. Just I was just curious, like where. Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, any of these topics could be their own podcast.
yeah,
So I think this will be a good way that we can get topics out there. And then if people have, I'll put like a link of communication. If people want to get in touch with you about coaching, like they can ask some specific questions then. Um, and in regards to images, I can't post images in like show notes, but if there's links to
okay,
images, definitely send me those and we'll
okay,
put
cool.
put those in the show notes.
Yeah.
So before we leave the topic of like the overview, besides all of like, hey, if you're talking about training as a female and you're just reading stuff online, you're probably reading about things that are based on males. Do we miss any other big bullet points as to why it's an important topic?
I think I'm a big fan, if you haven't found already, that knowledge is power. And even if you don't use that knowledge, just like know that like oh like if I'm not doing if I miss my times or my intervals or my I'm supposed to hit a certain weight on my squats and I just don't feel very good during my luteal phase. That's why. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily like a training like my coach didn't prescribe the right weight or whatever, or like if you're scratching your head and you're like, man, like why is she not doing well in this week? Like I'm trying to have up weeks here, and then perhaps you should shift the up weeks. You should shift them to work around when you ovulate or when you menstruate. I think that's my selling point, and then like within that, there's other topics to be had.
So I want to ask this question. You were like, hey, I don't know. You don't want to step on people's toes. Don't worry. People will crap on me on the comments because I don't know all this stuff. But I'm happy. I'm fine being the uneducated male here
Cool.
because I think when you were talking about the follicular phase and it starts at day 0 when a woman has her bleed, like when do you say then start going hard? Because in my, and maybe I'm totally off being a dude, like that to me is like, ooh, that sounds like a day. You don't want to be going hard that day. Do you wait a couple days after that? Or like how would you, and how do you tell female athletes that are new to this process, like, okay, you're having that on day 0, start planning to go hard on day 1, 2, 0?
Day one, like I mean, even the day before, like I personally know, like one of the things I know that if I'm going to get my period, it's my HRV increases, and then I feel really good in any athletic task. I feel better cognitively, like I can, my memory doesn't suck. I'm able to come up, like just recall words or stories or whatever it is, like research like better. Like I'm just sharper, and that's like day one, like go for it. Like I think a lot of my PRs have been around that in the follicular phase for sure, and that's
Hmm.
kind of what the research represents. Now I have seen research like you were saying that some women don't know, and and to me that's a big picture for research in exercise physiology, because there's nothing that drives me crazier than like, so I'm reading about carbs a lot right now because I'm training for this Ironman, so I'm really trying to get in the nitty gritty on types of carbs, and they're like 7 healthy males, and I'm like, what the hell's a healthy male? Like they eat all their vegetables? Like what do you mean? Like give
Yeah.
me their max VO2, give me how long they've been training, give me their eight, you know what I mean? Like tell me more.
Hmm.
So I would say, to kind of answer your question, the ones I'm trying to focus on are like very elite level women, like Olympians, professionals, and those are the ones that seem to really be like, oh yeah, I know my body really well, and it seems like the follicular phase is better for me.
Hmm.
And then the next question, usually after what you just asked, is going to be like, oh, but I have symptoms, I have cramps, I have all these things. We need to figure that out, why you have those symptoms. You should. I don't think that's a good thing to have cramps. I don't think it's a good thing to have headaches. So that's different than your physiology, right? Estrogen and serotonin like each other. So when estrogen drops, serotonin's going to drop. That can signal a lot of headaches. So we need to find ways to figure out not to have that abrupt drop in serotonin, that it is more of a staggered drop, and like maybe you won't get a headache as quickly. Work on hydration, just like work on all the things around those symptoms. If you get cramps, are your hips tight? Are you, in a really acute hip angle on your bike that maybe you need to think about changing that at that point, or stretching your psoas, or there's just a ways around those symptoms, if that makes sense.
What's your favorite psoas stretch on a quick tangent?
I am brutal, and I will shove a kettlebell or a foam roller in there and just lay on it and try to be really.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
like the so right, which is hilariously like a
yeah,
kettlebell handle. But
yeah,
have you seen the Mark, the hip hook by Aletha,
yeah.
What do you think about that?
Man, I wish I came up with those pieces of plastic and charged $60 for those. I just was not smart enough to get on that trend. Let me know if you want to do any other stretches like that. We'll just, get someone to make us some plastic and we can be, millionaires like
There
the
you go.
right? That's what I
Oh
think.
yeah, it's my friend had that, and it's an interesting product. I can't tell if it's like. Well, we won't go down that tangent. Okay, so then what would be a good next topic of? I know we kind of talked about, well, overview of hormones. Maybe that's the next good one for those
Yeah.
that don't know them, including myself.
Yeah, I like that one because it's like this is applicable to men too because there's like this testosterone deficit trend that everyone's like, oh, my T's low. I gotta get on T. I gotta get all these things. And my worry is that it's not being tested properly. Now, I have no problem with people taking, if they're responsible about taking steroids. Like 35 plus men to get a therapeutic use exemption. I don't want to shit on anyone. That's fine. But I want to make sure stuff's being tested properly because your testosterone's highest in the morning and lowest at night. And so I want to make sure people are not testing after a stressful day of work and then going to the lab at 5, because of course your T is going to be lower then.
Hmm.
So that's something I think is really applicable. Same with women's hormones. When we test women, a lot of times we'll do a total sample of blood work. So you get a total. There's total hormones and then there's free hormones. I care more about the free hormones, and those are tested through saliva. So to do a spit test at 2 times of the month for women is probably the best representation, best picture of how women's hormones are responding.
Mm. Okay. What's the That's interesting. I was actually my brain was stuck on because I knew a guy that was like 55 and he was on testosterone, but he said he couldn't race, and I don't remember the full context, but it was like, what do you have to do to get a TUE? Because I actually like 35 plus. Are there a lot of males on testosterone then? Like I thought that was a much older thing.
I've heard that. Because it is a little taboo, like it's not something I want to ask in the Peloton. Like, hey man, you juicing? Like that's not a good thing to ask. But I would love to do like a short, clinical survey to see how many people actually are. What I've heard and when I've read about how to get therapeutic use exemptions, it seems pretty easy.
Hmm.
Because you don't have to take a ton. It just like what I think the responsible use is that you're just trying to get it to a certain level, whatever level you and your doctor decide is good for you. And we're just trying to keep you healthy, not necessarily for racing.
Hmm.
That seems like a good idea, right?
I mean, I would love to be asking people this because if they're taking it and they shouldn't be, then that's like total, like
Yeah,
if someone's not comfortable talking about that, that's a eyebrow raiser.
yeah.
Like,
That's a good point. That's a good point. It should be acceptable for me to ask.
and maybe that's what it was. I'm trying to remember the therapy that this guy went on. Maybe it was just too much of a dose to be legal, but it was something that he still wanted to get faster and was very open to his team and people in his, like, even his city. People knew he would come to group rides, be like, I can't race because I'm like basically cheating.
Yeah.
But it's what like he was having like a lot of physical problems without it. So okay, so how do these hormones affect a woman, and maybe even tying that to sport, like in the endurance community, because they're, going out doing these long training sessions, strength training, like doing more than the average woman who's not fully active. What's going on there?
Do you think I should go over like what each hormone, like estrogen, progesterone, like what they do and their
Yeah,
benefits?
yeah, I would hit the biggest ones. I think that's like a good learn. But there's definitely gonna be people who have like never heard the word progesterone, and I couldn't tell you what it does. So,
Cool. So estrogen, as I said earlier, is kind of the star, the MVP of the follicular phase, and its job is to prep the endometrium for attachment of a fertilized egg. So that's the reproductive portion. That's its main point. As much as I want my body to get me ready for this Ironman, it actually doesn't care. It's got primal instincts that it wants to get pregnant, and that's kind of the theme, right? Even though we're like, yo, like I might never have kids, but that's still what my body wants. So we got to kind of keep that centered around like when we talk. But then as far as exercise physiology, estrogen increases anabolism, muscle mass, strength, bone density, metabolism. protein synthesis, mood, increases verbal skills, as I was kind of talking about earlier. You're more confident. When I was doing all this research for the continuing education credit that I was like teaching, I asked my boyfriend, I was like, hey, like, tell me about my hormones. Like, what do you notice about it? And the biggest takeaway that he gave, or the biggest feedback I got from him, was he said, if I'm going to pick a fight with him, it's going to be on day 7 when my estrogen is the highest, because he thinks I'm most confident then. And I have like the least brain space for like bullshit. So I like, like, which I think is really funny. So I mean, also a good time to race, right? Like you got to be confident to race.
100%.
Anyways, estrogen also increases insulin sensitivity, and it's anti-inflammatory. It's glycogen sparing, so you're going to use fat as fuel more often.
Hmm.
It's also stuff I was looking at when I'm learning about more carbs, and there's usually only men in these carb studies that I was kind of referring to earlier, which I'm like, oh man, like it'd be so cool to compare women in luteal and follicular phase and see what actually happens there. And then I mentioned it's got a relationship with serotonin. The negatives of estrogen is it decreases tendon and ligament stiffness. So ACL tears actually occur in the end of the follicular phase when estrogen is highest, which really sucks. But that's really its only negative.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Mhm.
Why is that? Is it like makes it more pliable and easier to
Mhm.
literally tear?
Yeah.
Like I wonder what's the biological reasoning do you think behind that?
I want to dive into that one too. I haven't, because I've been curious too. But you gotta, like I said before, kind of center it around like primal instincts. Like,
Yeah, like
is there a reason that I'm like getting
you'd be
ready to like expand and contract my
yeah,
sacrum for pushing a baby out, or you know what I mean?
right.
Um, Probably something around that. Um,
Well,
but
especially yeah, if it's would you say day 7?
Day 7's when it's supposedly the highest.
Okay.
And then it's
Hmm.
gonna, right. It's all of this is gonna vary a little bit. So like
Right.
trying to prevent people being like, like, well, I know my estrogen's highest on day 10, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, like it might be, but like we're just using numbers for clarity and
Right.
simplicity.
No, yeah. There'll be someone in the comments maybe day 9, not day 6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like
We're
maybe
ballpark.
next
We're
time do like
getting as close as we can.
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, keep the list going.
And then progesterone's the MVP of the luteal phase. It changes the endometrium to secretory structures, or continues prep for eggs implantation. So it's wants to harvest this home for this baby. That's the goal
Mm.
of progesterone, to make it nice and hospitable for a new human. And then, like I said, it's not ideal for training, so it's got a lot of negatives. So it actually increases core temperature, increases muscle breakdown, increases insulin resistance, and increases fat deposits. It decreases protein synthesis. It's an aldosterone inhibitor, so sodium and the sweat response goes down. So, like, none of those things are ideal. The only positive of progesterone that I really know of, or for exercise phys, is that it's neuroprotective, and that concussion idea is called the withdrawal hypothesis. So, like I was saying, as progesterone leaves, you start to have more concussion symptoms because it's no longer there to have those benefits.
Hmm. Okay. Interesting. What's okay, any other big ones?
A lot of us are more interested in testosterone. So women also have a lot of testosterone. We just don't talk about it as much because that one's the same throughout the cycle, or it's more stable. It does increase a little bit during ovulation, but it's pretty much the same. But a lot of us know it increases protein synthesis, muscle mass, strength, bone density, EPO, and red blood cell production. So everyone likes testosterone. Not a ton of drawbacks to that unless there's too much.
Hmm. Too much from like what would create too much testosterone? Like if someone's lifting too much, like is that happening to
No,
females
no.
or
You can't. Women cannot create too much testosterone unless there's. I don't. There's probably a tumor or something aberrant that can form
okay.
in normal physiology, but it would be from like injections, steroid injections, and then
Okay.
some of the obvious negatives there. So.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you had mentioned the injuries were really the ACL tears. What other ailments do females see more often, or maybe just to alert women of, hey, this happens more than you might even read about if you're reading male studies?
Ankle sprains, ankle rolls, things like that. Because your ligaments are more lax, ligaments and tendons are more lax. So your proprioceptors, which are within those, so the Golgi tendons and muscle spindles, if you're not, I would say it's easier to roll an ankle in that phase too.
Hmm. Trying to think of what's maybe some on the bike application to that. Those are like off. Do you notice any difference riding in between different phases at all? Like how your body is just you're like you hit hour 3 and just something feels different, or is there no difference in phases or things like that?
I should do that, like, as far as like how my body feels. I should think about that. I haven't had that question before, but I really like it. The let's there is a cool there's some cool stuff about metabolism with that currently the only sport that women are better than males at is long distance swimming. So like the Catalina Island swim, and then like Cuba to Miami, those are held by women because women are better at digesting fats. So I think that's pretty cool. So as far as like hour 3, and then, right as we know, as far as endurance events go, the gap between men and women in like a 100 miler is way shorter than it would be in like a crit. Because women are better at like the endurance stuff. So like 3 hours was a good number to throw out versus like a 1 hour event. I think it's going to be hard for women to match men. I'm not saying it's impossible because I don't ever want to say that. The beautiful thing about science is that it's always changing, and that we're always doing more and we're always digging and like learning more about it. But we right now we have what's called I believe it's the 8% rule. I gotta this is something I also would like to quote. So let me find it real quick in my slides. Um, Maybe it's the 10%. 10%. It's the 10% rule. Sorry,
That's all right.
10% rule is the stabilization of the gender gap in world records, and it was observed in like 82 events, and this was in 2010. So basically, after like 1983, we used that number because women really started to get into sports in the 80s. Like we had like the Boston Marathon a little bit before that. But in the 80s is when we really saw a boom in women that like were interested in being competitive.
Mm.
So the 10% rule states that there's a 10% difference between women and men for all events. So everyone is getting faster and better and stronger, and we're like constantly breaking records. Like this Olympics was awesome. If anyone saw any track and field events, it was really really cool. But within that, it's still a 10% delta of speed and time. So maybe women will surpass men, but at this point, it's still we're seeing this 10% kind of stabilization.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know there was like such a good round figure across the board. I'd be curious too about like ketones in women if they're already really good at using fat, or even fat adaptation protocols. That's like a total podcast in itself because some people
Yeah,
believe in it, some people don't.
yeah,
I've been messing with a product that it's called Vespa, and it's kind of blowing my mind. And I don't want to believe that it works, but every time I use it, I'm like, this is so weird. So I'd be curious what the difference is with females. Like, would it upregulate their fat burning even more, or maybe it doesn't work as much because they're already really good at that? That would be really interesting. I'm gonna maybe hit up those guys and ask them
yeah,
about this.
absolutely.
Birth control. So you kind of already mentioned the difference. Any other big points on that? Because I guess obviously I'm not talking about this with my guy friends or my female friends, but it just seemed like I have 3 sisters. So like, I feel like I saw like the little cases all over the place and whatever growing up when I was little. It seems, um, like that would be such a big life choice, and maybe I'm overplaying it for sport. And so that it strikes me as very interesting. Like, hey, you could be better if you don't take this, but are there any other things you want to highlight on that topic as to like you might be able to perform better in the follicular phase if you don't take birth control? Or if a woman has to for some reason, is there a type that you would recommend they take for sport?
Yeah, for sure. So you're right, and it isn't even as a female. And I'm trying to work on my language whenever I ask patients about that because it does even still seem like that. I don't want to think there's shame, but some women are still like a little bit like, oh yeah, like I take that, or antidepressants or anti-anxieties, which I think are also linked to the hormone cycle significantly because we see more women with mental health stuff. Um, so My stance is pretty against it, because of I don't think there's a lot of benefits, and especially women under the age of 25. I think it's actually dangerous and contraindicated. Your brain, no one's brain is well. Women's brains are developed at age 18. Your frontal lobe is fully developed then, but men are not till 25. Their frontal lobe's not developed till then. But I still kind of take that stance at age 25. Seems good, for a lot of things over the or oral contraceptives. Any type of big pharma product, seems like you should wait till 25. And my reasoning is there's a lot of statistics about anxiety and depression from birth control because we're playing with that cycle in younger women. And it's like,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I have this in my slides about the increase. I do have it. So women ages 15 to 19 have 100 to 220% higher risk of depression than non-birth control taking women.
Hmm.
And that's we're really only talking about the oral one, like the copper IUDs, and those should not influence your hormones in this manner. But that the risk of depression that was done in Scandinavian countries. I'm not sure of the year, but we see that time and time again that it causes other issues. Um, but I think about if we we say, hey, you don't need to take birth control. There's other ways to prevent pregnancy, and there's certainly ways to regulate your hormones a lot better. And just the knowledge of like when you ovulate, and then how exercise like riding your bike or running can help regulate your hormones and decrease your risk of anxiety and depression. I think again the theme knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome. What's so then if someone is taking the pill, and this was from Stacy Sims, do you recommend taking it the night before as opposed to in the morning, or is there a timing that's better or worse in your opinion?
As with all things hormones, consistency matters. So it's whatever. If that's your choice, then compliance is a big thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like it doesn't matter the time. To my knowledge, it doesn't matter the time you take it as long as it's kind of the same time, because you're trying to get hormones regulated. And that's with sleep too. Like if people are trying to improve their sleep, having the same wake times and bed times is really important. And then if you got to shift your sleep, which I'm trying to shift my sleep right now, to where like I'm trying to be on that bus for the Ironman at 4:30 a.m. And so like I don't know what time I'm gonna have to get up to be there. But I'm not used to. There's a time in my life I was used to being up at 4:30 a.m. But not right now. I wait till like 5:30 to get up. And so I'm trying to shift my circadian rhythm an hour to 2 hours back. So I got to go to bed earlier. I got to wake up earlier. I got to change my, what I'm eating and what time I'm eating when my meals are. Uh,
Hmm.
but all things matter for hormones.
Where is the Iron Man?
Chattanooga.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're Central Time? No, they're East Coast time, aren't they?
Yeah, I had to look that up too because they're like right on the edge. But yeah,
Okay.
they're on the East Coast.
Yeah, okay. So then what about Stacy talked about this when you're menopausal, what types of changes happen? So the older athletes that are listening to this are like, well, okay, that's in my past. What should they
Yeah.
be aware of?
Yeah, so you're gonna lose the estrogen, and that sucks because that's all the. I mean, you're gonna lose progesterone too, but the estrogen is the ones we care about. And so that's when you kind of change your training after you go through menopause to you're going at like, and I'm kind of at the point where for time's sake I'm only going after quality over quantity. I don't do a lot of junk miles anymore. There's definitely a purpose behind all my training. And women after menopause have to think about that even more. So more lifting heavy, more hit workouts are actually indicated when women don't want to do that as much because there's still that stigma in that generation that I'm going to get bulky. And really, that's impossible, right? We talked about testosterone earlier. It's really, really hard to get big as a woman. Now, I work in a CrossFit gym. That's where my clinic is, and we have women that are big because they lift all the time. They're not. I don't mean that in any kind of negative way, but they're like far bigger than I probably will ever be as a puny endurance athlete. But
Hmm.
they've done that through years of training, right? But as a menopausal woman, you're probably not going to have any significant muscle mass gain to where you find that like aesthetically displeasing. Like you're not. It's just not going to happen. But I think that's what that stigma is still about. That they're just afraid they're going to get big.
What do you define as junk miles? Because I think that's an important thing to when someone
Oh
hears it, like, what does she mean? What am I doing junk miles?
man. I don't know when the last time I did like a coffee spin that I just went
Mm,
out and like hung out in zone one and, enjoyed the roses, which I'm not against them, but I just don't feel like I have a lot of time for it.
right.
Um, so I'm either doing something to strictly, recover, make my legs feel fresher, or I'm doing intervals, or I'm just doing something of zone two. There's a quality aspect of it.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that. Because some people will say like, oh, we'd be getting in the weeds, but some people are like, oh, tempo is no man's land. That's like junk miles, or this is this. So I always want, if someone uses that term, I need to get it defined. And I'm fully with you. That's why I tell people like, I don't have time for this recovery ride. I'm like, it says optional for a reason.
Yeah,
Like, don't,
yeah,
if this is adding more stress, don't do it. I rarely do recovery rides. I just don't have time. It's like
yep,
my days off are like, we're doing podcasts, we're coaching people, da da da. So
yeah.
the lift heavy, that was a really, it seems like Stacy really drove that home. And so I just want to reiterate that for the females out there that are menopausal, do the hard stuff. And actually, not to bring in a dude standpoint in this podcast, but I thought it was really interesting that, oh man, I'm going to blank on this guy's name. Paul, there's a guy that I raced out in Oregon one time at Oregon Trail gravel grinder, the stage race, and dudes were shredding. And these guys, I'm 42. I always look up to older athletes like, oh, that's really motivating. Someone's still out there like kicking butt. And I saw him at a gravel race last year, and he came up to me and he was third. He came in third in the open, and it was a small race, but still. I'm like, dude, you're still crushing, man. And he said, do you know what made me slow down? I stopped going super hard. And I was like, whoa, tell me more. And he just stopped doing as many races, stopped doing as many, anaerobic capacity workouts. And that's when he started to fall off. And so maybe there's a trend just amongst masters athletes
Mhm.
that, I don't know. Can you comment on that? Maybe that's like hormonally based for everybody.
I could not agree more. I'm 35, so I'm at that point of my life, and I think, like I said, I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, and as you have been doing this stuff for a long time, and I think you just have that in you that you want to shred all the time. Like you don't care if I got stuff to do afterwards. It's like, oh man, I just want to go hard all the time. And even harder than like if I had something scheduled as like an easy ride, I'm feeling good. I want to go hard. But I think you get older and you get smarter, and that's what maturing as an athlete means, is that you're like, I can't go hard all the time. This is stupid. Because then I like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like if you're like, I want to do max VO2 every day, which, right, I don't know how smart that is, but
Yeah.
if you can't get into that, you can't do that. You can't actually get into those zones. But if you take 2 rest days or 2 easy days, and whether that's on your bike or, you just got a lot of chores to do around your house and you're just moving. So
Mm-hmm.
2 easy days, and then you do max VO2 that third day, you're like, oh man, I can actually have a quality workout. That's been my take on it, and that's been also experience that just like I want to go to group rides every day. I want to shred. I want to
Yeah.
take pulls and attack, and like you just can't. Like
It's such a good point that you bring up because when you had said the line, you feel good, you want to go hard. And I have a newer athlete who's super strong and was telling them that every time when you have an easy day and you feel great, that does not mean just go hard. Save it for the really hard ride and you will go harder than you would if you're kind of going hard all the time. And the breakthroughs that he's having now is awesome to see. And it's like, oh, it's so easy to forget that when you've been doing it for so long. It's like, that is a great point that you bring up.
yeah, I ran with.
So
Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I ran with Kenyans in college. I ran cross country and track, and so I actually lived with one of them, and it was wild because we'd have like as American white people, we have our easy training days, and I'm like, I'm gonna go like 7:30 pace, 8 minute pace, and they would be like walking. They'd be like 10 minute pace for their runs, and then they would like murder us the next day on the track because like theoretically if I'm only in I my heart rate was low at that time, so I was in much lower heart rate, but they would have been in like low zone 1 heart rate for their easy
Mm.
days, and then like high zone, like just like murdering us the next day, and I'm like, why are they, like I couldn't figure it out, and then honestly it took me until like recently that I was like, oh, this is what the Kenyans do, like they go slow on their slow days, fast on their fast days.
Do you recall, and this was probably 6 years ago, I want to say, there was an American marathoner who went and lived with Kenyans, and there was a big article about this. You're smiling, so just ring a bell at all.
I think I've
because
heard of it, but I don't remember the article.
it was fascinating. I told him, I'm like, I'm going on this Kenyan program. And just he talked about how their day was structured and how they got up crazy early, went for a run. And I think it was a shorter run, came home, slept before having breakfast, then had breakfast, fueled up, went for their long ride. And it went through. And I can't remember what magazine put this out. It wasn't like ESPN. It was because this, just the whole story of the cultural vibe amongst these runners and the tight knit group that they had. And it was a really well, I'll have to try and Google that. But when you said Kenyan runners, that always like sparks something in my head, like, oh, these guys are just really onto something different. It's hard to go easy on the easy days
Oh yeah.
sometimes. I mean, it's like, oh, I'm pushing high zone too. I feel good. I should probably maybe not always do that. So What's this has been awesome. What are any other big topics that we can pass along to female athletes that will help them as they're sort of, trying to figure out their body and
Um, Man, I think that's probably the best like overview because I can get in the weeds pretty quick on some of this stuff, and I don't usually want to because then I don't explain ideas well enough and what. So, but if there's questions, like I would love to like answer those questions and like
what's the
talk
best
about.
way? So we'll post your Instagram. Do
Yeah.
you blog, TikTok, tweet, any other thing? Like where should people follow you along? And are you on Strava?
I am on Strava, yeah. My Strava name is Smitty Smith. If anyone wants to friend me, I'll friend you back. And then
Smitty Smith. Okay.
yeah, and then the same with Instagram. It's at drxsmithx. That's probably the best way to reach me. And then my email is drxsmithx@gmail.com. Happy to spread as much knowledge as I can, and throw out other podcasts by women that like have done their PhDs on this.
Is there a significance to the X, or is it just to separate the word out?
It's hard when your name is Amanda Smith. It's hard to come up with
Right.
handles without numbers in them, and I don't really have any meaning to any numbers, so I was just like, I'm gonna do the
There's
X.
there's probably a couple of Amanda Smiths out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What's the last thing that I wanted to ask? Oh, what do you think when you think about all this, the big picture for a very experienced listener listening? What's like a topic or something that you've gone through in your own training and racing that maybe you learned and changed, or what is, this is the question is almost like all of your knowledge and experience, what have you learned to make you a better athlete while dealing with all of the changes that happen in the female body, if that's asked correctly?
Yeah. What prompted me on all of this was I had 6 stress fractures in college, and like I said, stress fractures are women have them more often. And I did all the things like I went to they had me go to a dietitian at school and athletic trainers, MDs, PTs, all the things, and I just couldn't get well. Like I just kept getting stress fracture after stress fracture. And at that time, they really emphasized the female athlete triad, which was really outdated information. It was from Barbara Drinkwalder's research in like 1986. And this was, I graduated in 2012. So, like, I'm like, dude, why are we applying this bogus research to me? And they were shoving milk in me, vitamin D. My iron levels were low. So it was like ferrous iron at the time. Um, and then where else was tons of carbs. I think I was doing 60 to 70% of my diet was carbs because like, oh, you're a cross country runner, you need carbs. And like really you're running, 60 miles a week. For me, that was my volume. I didn't get past that. And I think my theme with that is that that was severely mishandled, and I didn't get any results until I went to a chiropractor that had a more global view of the situation. Changed my iron to iron bisglycinate, much more readily available iron than ferrous iron. So all my blood markers went up whenever I took a probiotic and started taking the right amount of iron, because that's also kind of linked a little bit to bone health. He told me to completely stop doing milk. So I haven't had milk in years, any like hard dairy, because when we pasteurize milk, we actually take the calcium to phosphate ratio is incorrect, so it can actually leach calcium from bones when you have milk. So if you're taking like, and I'm not saying don't have lattes, like sure, enjoy life, but you don't need to be drinking gallons of milk every week.
Are you
Um,
no dairy? Sorry, jump out. Are you no dairy completely, or just no milk?
I enjoy life, so I will have like a latte, but I'm like certainly not buying gallons of milk or having like a glass of milk or anything like
Are you
that.
eating pizza?
I don't pizza's for a different reason. Usually the high gluten or glyphosate, whatever theory is that, something about it makes my HRV drop. So I don't know if it's the cheese or what. I eat cheese though. Like I
Okay.
will eat pizza sometimes. But like those are all things. Again, knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Choose your battle. If you're gonna have beer and pizza, like know how you're gonna feel the next day. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for me at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my biggest takeaway is to like learn from your negative experiences and then like seek truth, like look for more, be like, okay, so like we're going off research from 1986, like is there not anything better out there? So that's kind of my biggest takeaway, what kind of got me into this, why I keep pushing forward, why I keep educating, and then women aren't equally represented in any of the research.
And then I like that seek truth because it's something that's been ringing in my head about my own training. And would you agree in any aspect of like sometimes things that might work for you at 21, you become 24, it doesn't work for you anymore. And then you learn more things and you might apply those things later in life at 30 or 35. Like it seems like in training and endurance sports, there's cycles of things that work and don't work. And not necessarily maybe in the hormonal phase, but have you ever seen like things that you kind of like, that's not for me anymore. And then you kind of come back to them later on.
Absolutely. I'm always changing what I think when I'm gathering research. And then, like, as my body's changing and like time allowances and just like periodization models, like, people like to talk about paradoxical versus pyramidal and like what really works. It depends on where you are in your life and where you are in your fitness. Right now, I'm training for a race, so I'm going to be, and I'm kind of fast. So I'm going to do more of a pyramidal style training. I want to hit like all those zones and versus like a paradoxical training, I think is more suited for beginners or people that don't have as much time to get those gains. So it depends.
Mm,
Like if I don't think I'll ever step away from endurance sports, but if I were and I was only just trying to get gains to, be healthy, I would probably do more of a paradoxical style. And then even like block style periodization versus undulating periodization models. Like I think women do better on undulating periodization models because that's how our hormones go, right?
mm-hmm.
We're constantly changing, and versus men, I think might be able to do more block style that they can just keep pushing that stimulus longer and longer, and then able to recover because they have more testosterone.
Mm.
But those are things that like I have changed my mind as I've aged too. That I'm like, oh, I can just do another up week. I can do another up week. But that's silly, right? Like you learn, you live and you learn.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Everybody, we'll put links down below so you can follow along with Dr. Smith. And any other closing comments for the people?
Oh man, no. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out and doing this. This is going to be awesome. And I'm trying to think of what else I want to hit on. Yeah, check out all her links, follow along, and good luck, everybody, with your training and racing. We'll talk to you soon.